Hello and welcome to this edition of Northwest Newsweek. I'm Brittany Ramsey. The shockwaves created by the latest discovery of hundreds of unmarked graves in Saskatchewan are being felt right across the country, including by Indigenous leaders here in the Northwest. 751 grave sites have been found by members of the Cowessess First Nation on the grounds of a former residential school near Regina.
Devastating, infuriating.
Kiewit Sol Mamakwa is the only Ontario MPP who's a residential school survivor. He believes this latest discovery, along with the remains of 215 children recently found in BC, is just the tip of the iceberg. Mamakwa notes the road to healing will be long. It starts with citizens of all backgrounds demanding a meaningful response from governments and the Catholic Church.
We need to be able to stand beside Indigenous people across the country and make sure that, we put governments to account, and not only that, it's the churches too. I know the 751 unmarked graves that they found, there's no names attached to them. We need those records to be able to determine who they are, bring them home, but also how they died.
The Fort William First Nation is also in mourning. Last week, Chief Peter Collins demanded that the government investigate 3 possible burial sites in Fort William's traditional territory. And Thursday, he called for public apologies on Canadian soil from some high-profile figures.
The Queen needs to come here. The Pope needs to come here. The Prime Minister needs to come to all of our communities. That apology will go a long, long way, but saying sorry doesn't. What does that really mean? And I listen to politicians say we're sorry. Well, what does sorry really mean when you continue to find these little ones buried in unmarked graves? What can we do to make it better? We have to stand united. We have to work together. There's a lot of healing that has to go into this.
Canada is slowly easing international travel restrictions. Starting July 5th, fully vaccinated Canadians aged 12 and up won't have to self-isolate for 2 weeks upon their arrival. Health Minister Patty Hajdu made the announcement this week, but some Conservative politicians in this region are criticizing the plan, and Hajdu's Liberal colleague wishes his government would have gone further. Ryan Benazzo explains.
Traveling in and out of Canada is about to get a little easier for some people as of 11:59 p.m. on July 5th.
Fully vaccinated travelers who are permitted to enter Canada will no longer be subject to the federal requirement to quarantine.
But kids under the age of 12 who aren't yet eligible for a vaccine will still have to self-isolate, even while their parents are free to come and go. The government is facing some criticism.
People are maybe frustrated.
And Thunder Bay Rainy River MP Marcus Pulowski is among those who thinks his government is being too cautious.
I think probably the right thing to do would be recognize, especially if numbers are low overall, that the kids don't present a great risk, even if they're not vaccinated, as long as the whole family, the rest of them have been vaccinated.
It's really doing nothing to support tourism.
Eric Melillo is upset the Canada-U.S. land border will remain closed to non-essential travel for at least another month. He says that's more time that tourism operators who rely on American customers can't afford to lose.
We're staring down now the second year in a row where we'll have very few, if any, tourists from the United States, and it's just not sustainable.
Operators deserve the federal government, who has exclusive jurisdiction over people coming and going across those borders, to enunciate a plan.
Provincial Minister Greg Rickford says it smacks of a government that doesn't know what it's doing.
If we could hear from the federal government a formal plan that would roll out for cross-border traffic, that would salvage some of the summer and the fall for our operators, that would be a big win for them.
In the absence of such a document, Melillo says he wants more federal money for the tourism sector.
In fairness, they have announced some sector-specific support for tourism in the budget, which the Implementation Act just passed this week. So we've yet to see really the details of what those programs will look like, and I'm definitely going to be watching that closely.
Ryan Benazzo, TBT News.
Wednesday marked the first time that active cases in the Thunder Bay District dropped to single digits since November 7th. That's something the district's medical officer credits to a ramped-up vaccine strategy. Meanwhile, the province announced Thursday it will enter step 2 of its reopening plan on June 30th. And Dr. Janet DeMille was confident, even before the announcement, that a fast track to step 2 would work well for the district. Corey Nordstrom has more.
The next move towards reopening could come sooner than expected, and Dr. Janet DeMille is on board. Premier Doug Ford tipped his hat that an announcement on a move to Step 2 could happen soon, which DeMille would agree with.
We're scheduled, I guess, to go into Stage 2 or Step 2, within a little over a week right now, and I think if they're, moving it up a few days from that, I think that would be fine.
Step 2 of reopening hinges upon 70% of adults having their first dose and 20% fully vaccinated, which the Thunder Bay District is long since passed, with more than 82% of locals over 18 getting at least their first dose and almost 30% with both doses. Good news also comes as the Delta variant has been a relative non-factor in the district. Despite it ravaging southern Ontario, DeMille says the most common variant they're seeing is still the UK or Alpha variant, with few active cases of the Delta variant.
We haven't seen spread, so we are a bit different here. We're doing better in terms of the Delta variant, but we know that if it's in other parts of the province or other parts of the country, that it could come here and spread here.
As second doses are now being administered to a greater extent, DeMille says we may have seen a plateau in those looking to get vaccinated, though she expects the rates of first doses to continue to climb, but at a slower pace.
We still are getting people coming in for those first doses, and when we go out into communities, when we go out into neighborhoods, which we've doing a couple of times this week, and we'll continue to do that, we're hoping to pick up those people and make it easy for them to get immunized, and hopefully they'll come forward as well. And that number, even if it goes out a little slowly, it will still go up.
Corey Nordstrom, TBT News.
Dryden residents were given a chance to weigh in on the latest costing proposal from the Ontario Provincial Police. However, there was actually very little input from the public, but some sparring input from members of council. Adam Riley reports.
Unlike the previous public meeting held in 2018, there were no members of the general public who spoke or asked questions at a virtual public meeting on OPP costing Thursday. However, representatives from the associations that represent officers and other staff did speak to the proposal. President of the Dryden Police Association, Janet Kaus, spoke to the roots of staff in the community and the merits of a municipal police service model.
Calls for service for intoxication, mental health, property crimes, break-and-enters, criminal harassment, and police assistance have risen over the past 5 years. Dryden Police Service is the only 24/7 service provider available in Dryden, aside from the hospital. The hospital's emergency room cannot house every person presenting with mental health issues, and a lot of times person in need of support or who need help will not present there all the time.
Only one email was sent in and read aloud, which questioned both the timing of the decision to seek another costing and the overall cost, which has been set at $1 million more than the costing presented in 2018. And while it was made clear at the beginning of the meeting that council were not to comment, respond, or debate, there were still a few tense moments.
With all due respect, I am a citizen of the community. This is a public meeting, and I do want to ask a question.
Yeah, as you recall, at the last costing, this is just part of the procedure.
I don't recall agreeing to any censuring of council members. I'm not a member of the Dryden Police Services Board, nor am I a member of the costing committee, and I would like to ask a question.
McKinnon's request was ultimately shut down, and the public meeting later came to a close. In an interview with TBT News prior to the meeting, McKinnon says due to accessibility issues for online public forums, he would like to see a second in-person meeting take place with COVID precautions in place.
Hopefully in September, when people are around, not one that's held on June 24th in the summer virtually during COVID, because there's going to be very little participation. I think I want to hear from some of the seniors that have built the community, some people that don't have the resources online or otherwise to really voice their opinion. I would like them to be able to stand up to a microphone
Due to stringent measures taken by city officials to control the meeting, it is unknown as to how many residents attended the virtual meeting. A final decision from council is expected to be made by November at the latest. Adam Riley, TBT News.
As the city of Dryden continues to discuss policing costs of its current municipal service or an OPP-led service, one councillor believes the choice is obvious, and he's questioning those who pushed for a second costing in 4 years.
At the end of the day, you wonder about the motivation for doing this.
Councillor Shane McKinnon says the cost increase between the OPP's 2018 proposal and its 2021 proposal should have been enough of an indicator against the OPP taking over municipal policing. The city is still $8 million in debt, and he believes council had its shot for this decision, and it should either be made by the next council or on the ballot for the 2022 municipal election. McKinnon says the numbers presented appear to be dubious at best, and that some councillors changed their argument by looking at the crime severity index and clearance rates as a reason to justify their switch.
You know, it's really disturbing that would be brought up when the whole essence of this new costing was the fact that we were so much higher in our policing costs than everyone else, which really we aren't. And that's been actually borne out in the numbers as well that we receive from the OPP. They're higher than what we pay now. You know, as a taxpayer as well as a councillor here, that's $1 million more a year.
McKinnon previously served as the city's chief of police. He knows there's belief that the city will see a financial return within a decade of making the switch, but is skeptical as provincial and municipal services rarely go down in cost within a 10-year period. When we come back, the Sioux Lookout First Nations Health Authority looks to avoid a crisis in First Nation dental care. In addition to the housing, mental health, and clean water crises, many Northern First Nations are facing a dental crisis as well, and it's been amplified by the pandemic. Now, the Sioux Lookout First Nations Health Authority is calling on the federal government to step in to prevent the situation from getting worse. Adam Riley has details.
For residents of remote First Nations, the only way to receive dental care aside from visiting dentists is to come to the Sioux Lookout Zone Dental Program Office in Sioux Lookout. However, over the years, the building has fallen into disrepair and has been closed during the pandemic. Sioux Lookout First Nations Health Authority Chief Operating Officer Janet Gordon says the situation is dire, as one person has already died as a result of a dental infection that went septic. Now officials have learned that Indigenous Services Canada will not be reopening the clinic due to the structural issues with the building. And while discussions between ISC and the Health Authority continue, there is a concern a new clinic will not be opened in the community, which doesn't sit well with Gordon, as health care, including dental care for First Nations, falls under the purview of the federal government.
When they say they're not going to put an office here in Sioux Lookout, they pull out a very important area of dental services that have been provided for our communities for many years. It was more than dental services. It acts as a supportive hub.
Under the current situation, if a First Nation resident needs dental care, they must now go to a private practice in Sioux Lookout, Dryden, Kenora, and even as far away as Thunder Bay or Winnipeg, which puts stress on residents and hints at an element of colonialism.
Their area of comfort has been, for a lot of communities, has been Sioux Lookout, originating from the old Sioux Lookout Zone, hospital, because they looked at it as their hospital. And then I think dental services was part of that hospital. And then when they leave outside of that area, they might have less supports.
In a statement, Indigenous Services Canada says it recognizes the challenges facing isolated communities. It goes on to say it has entered into formal discussions with the Sioux Lookout First Nations Health Authority to transfer all direct dental care to them, and is continuing to work with the Health Authority to explore options to establish a new facility. But no timeline was included for that endeavor. Adam Riley, TBT News.
The province's Special Investigations Unit has wrapped up its investigation of a Kenora OPP officer who punched a man in the face during an arrest after the man spat on him. The director of the SIU says criminal charges will not be laid against the officer. Joseph Martino says he does not believe the force used by the subject officer was excessive. His report concludes that the officer had just been spat on by a belligerent individual, and he's satisfied the reactive punch was to prevent any further assault on his person. The Ford government's latest cabinet shuffle saw a change in duties for Greg Rickford. The Kenora-Rainy River MPP added natural resources and forestry and dropped the energy ministry from his portfolio. Corey Nordstrom spoke to Rickford about the switch and also got his take on his recent dispute with the NDP's Saul Mamakwa.
Greg Rickford is no longer Ontario's energy minister and has added the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to his portfolio, while retaining Northern Development and Mines and Indigenous Affairs. The Conservative MPP believes the change makes sense with the synergies that are present in the ministries he now represents.
It's an economic portfolio, and frankly, one of the largest ones in the province right now. And that's the mandate that I got from the Premier. We want to develop our resources responsibly. We want full partnerships with Indigenous communities, and for the most part, that has gone very well. I'd like to see us be able to say it's going incredibly well.
But Rickford's relationship with his Indigenous Affairs critic looks to have taken a hit recently.
I keep telling them I'm here if you need some advice.
Saul Mamakwa expressed his displeasure with Rickford last week after the Kuwait-Noong MPP was not consulted prior to the province's $10 million commitment to investigate residential schools' burial sites, despite Mamakwa being the only member at Queen's Park who went to a residential school.
Saul sent a letter not long before we made our announcement, and I reassured Saul in person that the contents of his letter were, in my view, were fairly reflected, if not very well reflected, in what we intended to roll out.
Corey Nordstrom, TBT News.
A violent windstorm in the Dryden-Sioux Lookout area caused major damage and numerous power outages this week. This video posted to Facebook shows Sioux Lookout Sunset Inn just minutes after part of the roof was torn off by strong winds. Fortunately, there were no reported injuries. Hydro One had hundreds of customers without power. Meanwhile, at Eagle Lake near Dryden, this pontoon boat was flipped out of the water and onto another boat. The owner believes it was due to a microburst. And in Oxdrift, this barn was completely destroyed by strong winds, but thankfully, no one was hurt. Meanwhile, a family in Nipigon is still in shock after a house fire last weekend destroyed nearly everything they owned. This was the scene Tuesday following the Sunday morning fire on 1st Street in Nipigon. The blaze broke out in the garage, and then spread to the home, causing major damage. A couple and their 2 grandsons managed to escape unharmed. Since then, the family has received several donations to a special bank account to help them get back on their feet. The homeowner's daughter says there's been a lot of love and support from the community.
As good as you can do when every piece of your life is taken from you in an hour and a half. They're holding out because they have a lot of support from family, friends, our community, our Indian band, Red Rock Indian Band.
There's still no word on the cause of the fire. Anyone wishing to make a monetary donation can do so by sending an e-transfer to hefner@bell.net. That's HEPHNER@bell.net. Federal government has announced close to $10 million to install high-speed broadband internet for rural and Indigenous communities across Ontario, and half of that money is for the Kenora area. The Kenora District Services Board will receive close to $5 million to connect more than 4,200 households. 1,100 are Indigenous. Minister of Rural Economic Development Miriam Monsef says they're working hard to close the digital infrastructure gap, which she believes is leaving far too many Canadians behind.
Once connected, we will unlock economic opportunities. We will ensure that better supports for healing, health, safety, and economic security are unlocked and available, and will even the playing field for every Canadian so that no matter where they are, they have access to this essential service.
Canada needs to equip Indigenous communities with fast and reliable internet so that their businesses can operate and grow, so people can access good jobs, and so families can stay connected to essential services, and so their leadership can access the tools to help them effectively govern and advocate for their communities, and obviously in this pandemic for children to stay safe.
The announcement includes 11 projects in 17 different communities, servicing 6,000 households in total. Monsef says they hope to have the broadband installation completed by early 2022. And coming up after the break, National Indigenous Peoples Day celebrations take a deeper meaning this year in Dryden. June 21st marked National Indigenous Peoples Day across Canada, and in Dryden it had an even deeper impact as one of the roads was decolonized to make way for the future. Adam Riley has details.
The gathering was smaller than usual due to COVID-19 restrictions, but the atmosphere was full of life for the 2021 National Indigenous Peoples Day celebrations in Dryden. Drummers and dancers performed while onlookers watched in a socially distant manner. But for Dryden Native Friendship Center Executive Director Cheryl Edwards, Monday's event had a much deeper spiritual meaning in light of the recent discoveries of the bodies of children who attended residential schools in unmarked burial sites. She says it is the children who are able to carry the language, traditions, and teachings into the future.
And for many in the residential school who never made it home, their families never had an opportunity to do that. And we are hopeful with some of the programming that we have that we can bring that type of tradition and culture to every family who wants to seek it.
Monday also marked the end of one road and the beginning of two new roads in Dryden. Earlier this month, the road signs that designated Colonization Avenue were removed and replaced with Memorial and Beaujeu Avenues. For Edwards, it marks the culmination of an exciting year.
I'm so pleased that the residents had not only the understanding, the knowledge, and the wanting to change it, as well as the Indigenous community. And it's finally here, and it's something that we achieved as the Working Circle, and the City of Dryden had the courage to be able to support us with that as well.
Mayor Greg Wilson says he was hit with a melody of feelings, including relief, finality, and enthusiasm as he saw the names change. Noting prior to the Working Circle, the city had no mechanism to have meaningful, consistent dialogue with groups wanting to tackle issues in the city, like renaming Colonization Avenue.
Once we got the Working Circle established, we had a vehicle to be able to include, the 5 members, the Indigenous representative, Métis, included for sure, and as well as municipal staff and councillors. So we finally got the mix together and the right structure.
In addition to the name change, the Working Circle also helped council adopt a land acknowledgement similar to other municipalities in the region, and will now take a small break before reconvening in the fall. Adam Riley, TBT News.
That's all for Northwest Newsweek. Thanks for joining us.